Hi there. This is about how MPAI is doing its standards and is about reference software conformance and performance by Panos Koudumakis. So what is an MPAI standard? It's a collection of 4 documents associated with software and datasets. The first one is a technical specification that is guiding the users to make implementations. The second one is the reference software specification, which comes with attached software implementation and datasets, normatively equivalent to the technical specification. The third one is the conformance testing specification with datasets and/or methods to generate them, the tools and the procedures for testing the technical correctness of an implementation. And the fourth one is the performance assessment specification with datasets and/or the methods, again, to generate them, the tools and the procedures, that is the means to assess how well an implementation performs. Performance is a multidimensional notion, meaning, for example, how we can keep the implementations unbiased. And we are going to see this later on. We need to keep in our mind the artificial intelligence framework by MPAI. This is given in another talk, but we need to keep in our mind that is consisted from AI modules that can be connected in many different ways to create AI workflows. MPAI is standardizing the input and outputs of these modules and the workflows. And of course, the interaction with external entities like the MPAI store, knowledge base access, and so on. So for our purposes, this is sufficient. Now, the technical specification contains normative, that is compulsory clauses to be followed by a user wishing to develop a conforming implementation. There are 2 types of technical specifications. The system-oriented specification concerning with the support for AI operation. A good example is the MPAI AI framework that we have just seen. The second one is application-oriented specification concerning with specific domains, like, for example, the MPAI context-based audio enhancement or the MPAI multimodal conversation. An application standard contains applications, also known as use cases. For example, the multimodal conversation technical specification contains 5 use cases. The conversion with emotion, the multimodal question answering, the unidirectional speech translation, the bidirectional speech translation, and the one-to-many speech translation. Its technical specification is identified by 3 characters. For example, the multimodal conversation with MMC. Its use case contained in the technical specification by another 3 characters, like, for example, the conversation with emotion. For its use case, the technical specification specifies the workflow implementing the use case and the related aims. The workflows and the aims are specified by the function executed by these workflows and aims, the syntax and semantics of the input and output data of these workflows and aims, and of course the topology of the aims composing the workflows. The technical specification includes the syntax and semantics of all data used by all aims and workflows in a single section in one standard. Some of these may be shared between different aims or even workflows, and in the future, MPAI plans to have a standard collecting all of these shared aims and workflows. But at the moment, each standard contained all aims and workflows necessary to implement the standard. Now, the reference software specification. It contains the conditions of use. or the disclaimers about it, the descriptions of the reference software implementation, as well as the relevant datasets used by the workflows and the AIMs defined in the use cases of the MPAI technical specification they refer to. The software implementation of the AIMs are made available in one or more of the following software forms. So a reference software can come as a source code providing a satisfactory user experience and/or functionality. It may also come in a source code by providing a limited user experience sufficient to assess the value of the standard. For example, if it's a speech translation module, in the first case may include lots of languages. In the second case may include just conversion, just translation to one language. It may also come in a compiled code providing a satisfactory user experience and/or functionality. And the last one may come in a source code software wrapping, so may just provide as a source code a wrapping to a third-party service enabling a conforming AIM implementation. That is, a source code wrapper is provided that inside may have, for example, a link that runs the third-party service that is conforming to the AIM implementation. The reference software use cases or disclaimers. The reference software is a working implementation of a standard and not suitable for any other purposes. The reference software is not a ready-to-use product. It only exposes the correct input and output interfaces. It is released according to the MPAI modified Berkeley source distribution license. A compiled AIM of the reference software may not be used in commercial products or services. Sample input data may be provided if required to operate the software. If the reference software uses a knowledge base, this is also provided by MPAI. MPAI makes no guarantee that the AIMs or the workflows pass performance assessment, because the performance assessment requires more steps that explained later in this presentation, as well as in other presentations regarding the governance of the MPAI store. Users shall check whether they have the right to use reference third-party software. For example, if a compiler like C++ is needed to run the software, the users should make sure that they have access to that. The wrap AIM provided only in source code for the part calling the service, accompanied by description and references to documentation of the third-party services. The submitter maintains the wrapper for 12 months after the first publication of the reference software. If the third party discontinues the service within these 12 months, the best effort is done to find a similar third-party service. If the wrap AIM does not function after 12 months, it is the responsibility of the users to update it by themselves. Now, the conformance testing. The conformance specification sets the conformance testing rules to determine whether an implementation is technically correct. In digital media, as an example, an encoder produces data and the decoder can decode them. That is in the general sense. Therefore, the conformance testing can be formulated as provide bit streams and check that the decoder under test can correctly decode them, and feed bit streams of the reference software encoder and check that the reference software decoder can correctly decode them. For example, if you think of an MP3, the first one checks the decoder, where the second one checks the encoder and the decoder. Now, two digital media decoders, like an MP3, for example, may very well not decode the same bitstream in the same way. And this is due to different initial states, different precision levels, and so on. While they may have different outputs, may well pass the conformance testing. For example, it's well known that two MP3 decoders, they may have different quality depending on how sophisticated is the psychoacoustic model that they are using. Now, the output results to be different is rather the norm in MPAI rather than the exception. And that is because the AIMs may contain neural networks of unspecified architectures and trained with unspecified data sets. That's because MPAI is standardized the input and outputs of the AIM, not the internals of it. Now, the MPAI conformance specification defines the datasets or the methods to generate them, the tools and the procedures, that is the means, to test the technical correctness of an implementation. That was the general sense as we explained up to now. However, MPAI standards specify also the tolerance of the output of an MPAI of a model given the input data used for the test. So a new attribute is this tolerance defined in MPAI conformance testing. The MPAI conformance testing is based on the following process. Valid conformance tests may only be carried by the MPAI store using the means that we explained above. When the datasets are not made public, the MPAI store randomly selects a large subset of test items and feeds it to the AIM under test. End users are informed of which conformance test it has passed in two ways, with a descriptive sentence and a full table of results. The submitter is able to reproduce these results that the MPAI informed him about it. And in that case, the MPAI provides all the details of the data sets together with their identifiers of the records of the relevant conformance testing data sets, so to help the submitter reproduce the same output as the MPAI store. So it may be an interaction process to help MPAI store the submitter improve its conformance and, of course, its product or service. Some datasets may only be accessible, however, for a time window or a number of accesses after receiving the test results. So this process, interacting process and feedback process may be not endless. Furthermore, the MPAI conformance testing reflects the state of technology at the time of the publication of the conformance testing specification. However, standards are live organizations, so new versions may be created. And in this case, if a new testing rules can be defined for the new versions. So in that case, if a new version of the conformance testing specification applies to the current version of the technical specification as well. The current version may also apply to a new, to current or preceding version of the conformance testing specification. In this case, the MPAI shouldn't discontinue the support of the preceding version. Now, we're going to see an example of this conformance testing. For example, in the conversation with emotion, an AIM may take as an input speech and produce as an output the recognized text and the emotion. Now, in this case, the conformance testing is defined as the ability of the implementation to produce the Unicode text, the recognized text, and the emotion expressed as one of the MPAI standard emotions. For a user, knowing that the data are syntactically and semantically correct is relevant if the recognized text is not what was contained in the input speech and the emotion is declared as angry when in the input speech it was happy. So a system can be conformant, although the conformance if it's just syntactically and semantically correct, is not necessarily meaningful. So MPAI is going further to make this conformance meaningful, imposing that an AIM implementation conforms only when the output is perfect is not realistic, because no implementation can be perfect in all cases. So MPAI defines, for example, in this case, the word error rate is well known to grade the speech recognizer. And however, nothing is equivalent with respect to emotion. So MPAI is considering 3 emotion error rates. So in that case, needs to invent MPAI these error rates. And this may come from human testers, in this case, from a trained network to measure the distance between emotions, or to define an emotion space with suitable metrics. So while syntactically and semantically the conformance is helpful, further the tolerance need to be graded to become meaningful. And the last of the documents to make MPAI standards is the performance assessment. Researchers are engaged in this problem to determine when artificial intelligence is reliable. So MPAI defines performance on an implementation as the set of the following attributes. Reliability. Implementation performs as specified by the standard. For example, within the application scope with stated limitations and/or for the period of time specified by the implementer. The robustness. The implementation can cope with the data outside of the stated application scope with an estimated degree of confidence. For example, in an MP3, you may feed the decoder not with only the critical material, but with any kind of compressed audio. The replicability. The assessment made by an entity can be replicated with an agreed level by another entity. As we have seen also in the conformance, applies this replicability assessing grades. Fairness. The training set and/or network is open to testing for bias and unanticipated result, so that the extent of applicability of the system can be assessed. The performance can have grades, as we mentioned, and possibly depending on the specific domain. These grades sometimes are well known from the state of the art, but sometimes they need to be defined as the emotion grades by MPAI. So the performance assessment is the specification defining the means, that's the data sets and/or the methods to generate them, the tools and the procedures used to assess the performance of an implementation. For further information of these methodologies that MPAI is using to produce in standards, you can visit the MPAI community where you can find all information, not only for this, but for all the MPAI standards. That's from mine. Thank you very much for the attention.